Again, well, welcome everyone to today's webinar and presentation on the introduction to SEEC ClearPath California for monitoring municipal and community scale greenhouse gas emissions for the CivicSpark 2014 training series. Today's agenda will be pretty straightforward. I've separated today into two parts. Would be session one, which is more of an overview of how SEEC tools can support California local governments, which will comprise of two parts, just an update and a review of SEEC, which stands for the Statewide Energy Efficiency Collaborative and available resources for local governments. And then we'll also do an overview of SEEC ClearPath California in terms of an introduction. And then the second half, hopefully the majority of the time we'll spend, is a live demo of SEEC ClearPath California for the inventory, forecast, emissions reduction planning, and monitoring modules. And hopefully we'll leave about 15 minutes for a conversation or discussion at the end in case anything is not clear in terms of today's presentation. So I've mentioned the acronym SEEC a fair amount, and hopefully folks have some familiarity with it, but if not, SEEC stands for the Statewide Energy Efficiency Collaborative, and it is an alliance that provides no-cost technical trainings and resources to help California local governments increase energy efficiency and cost savings while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And for more information, please visit the website www.californiaseek.org. As you can see on the right-hand side, there is a logo soup of the different entities that are involved with SEEC. Three of them are the non-profit partners, which serve as the delivering entities for all the resources within SEEC. And I'll speak to those a little more in the next couple slides. And again, we have the four main investor-owned utilities that have comprised of SEEC. So folks are probably wondering how this came about. Well, a few years ago, the CPUC had discussions about leveraging funds for energy efficiency dollars that folks see on their energy bill every month. There's a 5% ratepayer tax, so part of those funds are doled out are basically taken from the utilities and then put into what they call non-resource or resource funding. So non-resource would be the kind of planning that we're doing right now, which is strategic planning. And resource funding is actually going ahead and swapping out light bulbs or doing weatherization projects or actually tangible type projects. So this type of work does fall into the non-resource funding, but we always know that good strategic planning can always help actually physical processes. So again, just a little background about how this all came to be. In terms of the SEEC investor-owned utility partners, there are four of them that can that actually cover the entire state of California. So California, the northern part of California, all the way down to North Santa Barbara County, is covered by Pacific Gas and Electric. For more information about their sustainability communities, actually it's now their local government partnerships program. You can visit the website. For the Southern California region, from pretty much South Santa Barbara County all the way down to almost San Diego, is Southern California Edison territory. And then we have Southern California Gas Company, which provides natural gas to Southern California. And then additionally, San Diego Gas and Electric Company, which provides electricity and natural gas to the San Diego regions. And in terms of the SEEC NGO Partners, I'm sure you're well familiar with ICLEI now. ICLEI is charged with delivering tools, resources, and trainings for SEEC for inventorying and climate action planning. So we're pretty much the technical and resource and tools entity of the SEEC partnership, whereas ILG is a wonderful organization that offers the Beacon Award. The Beacon Award allows local governments, local agencies to get positive recognition and shine a bright light on their accomplishments in terms of sustainability and energy reduction and greenhouse gas reduction. So as much as ICLEI provides the kind of the nitty-gritty tools, really ILG comes in to help shine a light on the great work and provide the recognition and the leadership that local governments are looking for in the state of California. And then last but not least at all, and thanks again to LGC for convening CivicSpark and giving ICLEI the opportunity to collaborate on this, is LGC serves as the convener for the Statewide Energy Efficiency Best Practices Forum and a ton of great networking meetings for local government partners, as well as a really wonderful slate of webinars that provide energy efficiency and sustainability topics. And I do need to give a shout out to Joseph Oldman, which is the statewide best practices coordinator. We'll have to get him on the next slide. But Joseph serves as the kind of sounding board for the entire state in terms of best practices around energy efficiency. It really has become a wonderful resource and convener for local governments, the investor-owned utilities, and the nonprofit partners to really help steer California towards getting to its emission targets and its energy efficiency targets. So now in terms of resources for California local governments, again, just want to let folks know that, again, these are no-cost resources to any local government in the state of California. And we've broken them down into 5 different quote-unquote categories. So we provide events and training. So we provide a set of webinars, on-demand training modules, and basically the training program that I just finished up doing, which was going around the state and delivering all-day presentations on SEEC ClearPath. So yeah, we really wanted to make sure that there's events and trainings available to local governments in their particular regions. Additionally, we have resources and guidance through SEEC, which provides a suite of frameworks, protocols, quick start guides, and a variety of other resources to help local governments make informed decisions about their climate and energy planning. And at the core of, in terms of the tools that we provide, is now SEEC ClearPath California, which is the online emissions management suite that is available to all California local governments. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Beacon Award is a really wonderful opportunity to get recognition on the best practices and the great work that local governments are doing. And the Beacon Award provides access to complete program resources on how to participate and profiles of participating jurisdictions and more resources about supporting local sustainability efforts. And then finally, we have the SEEC Forum, which is the annual SEEC Best Practices Forum that LGC convenes every year. So again, just a quick snapshot of the Statewide Energy Efficiency Collaborative's website. Again, for more information, you can go there and learn about all the great resources that are available. So now, to really move into today's meat and potatoes, as they say, for SEEC ClearPath California. Now, I was thinking about moving forward with today's presentation, and it dawned on me that folks are probably wondering, well, how does SEEC ClearPath California fit into the ecosystem of local governments and climate action planning and inventorying? And I'll get to that in a second, but I did want to start with this quick text box, and again to reiterate that this is the first comprehensive online emissions management platform for local governments in the world. Again, there's nothing else like that. Thanks to SEEC, we were able to collaborate and work with all SEEC partners to develop this platform. There was a pretty intense and rigorous technical advisory committee of local governments, of utilities, of other stakeholders that really helped make this platform become what it is. So again, for folks who are just tuning in for the first time, it's really exciting that you are a part of the first comprehensive online emissions management platform for local government greenhouse gas accounting. In terms of, I just wanted to provide a little bit of a chronological background of how it came to be. So, ICLEI's always been performing and delivering greenhouse gas inventory tools and climate action tools, and a lot of it, stemmed with the technology of the time. So, to pull up this first slide, CAPA was the Climate and Air Pollution Planning Assistant, which was something that ICLEI was able to create across the United States, actually, back in the last decade. And this was a climate action planning assistant, an Excel spreadsheet, which had a whole variety of different measures within different sectors that local governments could actually crunch numbers and figure out what series of measures are going to get them to their reduction targets. And so we had this really robust Excel-based tool, but at the same time, we were developing a online community scale tool for SEEC. This is the first generation of the online emissions management platform, but it was just strictly for community-based inventorying, and that's all it was. It was a pretty straightforward, simplistic tool. And then all the while we had, which became the foremost emissions management tool for local governments, which was called CACP, which was the Clean Air and Climate Protection desktop application. And this is something that ICLEI developed back again in the early part of the last decade for local governments to use to track their greenhouse gas emissions. And you know, it was an excellent tool when it first came out, but because it was a desktop application, it really left a lot of issues in terms of software glitches and also administration privileges. But it really did serve as the springboard for local governments across the United States, even in California, to actually track and monitor and calculate their community scale and municipal emissions. Again, so just looking at the ecosystem of tools available up until about this year, so it was a mixture of an online, a kind of an online tool, an Excel-based tool, and a desktop application. So as you could probably surmise, it was a little challenging, to say at the least, to be jumping from 3 different entities to really help local governments with their emissions management. So because of this pretty significant stakeholder engagement meeting and a lot of brainstorming on how to deliver the most comprehensive and streamlined tool for local governments, we decided that, along with SEEC, that it would be great to provide a fully comprehensive online emissions management tool that integrated all of those different tools into one succinct place. And so now we arrive in the modern age of cloud-based softwares, and we have SEEC ClearPath California, which is a 4-module system that allows local governments to inventory their municipal and community scale emissions, forecast out emissions based on different growth projections for both of those tracks. And then additionally, the most robust area is the planning module, which allows local governments to recreate their action plan within this platform and to identify which series of measures is going to get them to their reduction targets. And then last but not least is the monitoring module, which allows local governments to monitor and track the progress of each one of their measures that they identified within the planning module. And the really wonderful thing about this platform, as we get into it, is it really is a seamless integration from start to finish in terms of getting your data into the inventory module, porting it into forecasting, and then getting that into the planning module. And then finally, the monitoring module allows local governments that monitoring, that project management type tool to really track the progress of each one of their measures. So in terms of the role of SEEC ClearPath in the whole ecosystem of inventorying and climate action planning, while it can't do everything, it pretty much serves as you recall, as the emissions calculator, the planning scenario platform, and also the monitoring platform. So outside of the actual data collection and crunching all the numbers to get them ready, it really serves as that platform. So the way in which the role of SEEC ClearPath plays out in our mind for local governments is it starts with, as again, you get your baseline inventory data, you get all that activity data for the municipal and community scale, you enter it into SEEC ClearPath, you set up your emission factors, and it calculates all of your greenhouse gas emissions across carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. From there, you're able to actually then move all your inventory, your baseline inventory data automatically into the forecasting module, and then with the setup of your growth indicators like household growth, service population, and job growth, you'll be able to see what emissions are going to look like over time based on the growth projections of your community. Then from there, you move into the planning module, which is you set up your subsequent inventory and subsequent targets, whether they're short, midterm, or long-term. And then ultimately here, that's where you design your climate action plan. And part of monitoring and tracking the progress of your plan is to actually do subsequent re-inventories, as I mentioned. In this particular older slide, we had to do every 5 years, but again, we're moving to get local governments to actually review their inventories every 2 to 3 years just to get into the habit. But again, it's all based on bandwidth and the capacity of the local government. And so again, just to reiterate, so we really see the role of SEEC ClearPath is to be the guiding platform for local governments through emissions calculations, forecasting, identify, monitoring, mitigation measures within their action plan and towards achieving their reduction targets. And so where we see the monitoring module come into place is to see whether or not the strategies are actually being able to set up a process to mitigate against the business as usual forecast. And that's why I set up this little arrow, is we really see the monitoring module as the final piece within a comprehensive online emissions management platform. So I know I'm going to actually just keep moving forward. There are probably going to be a lot of questions as to how it works, and hopefully once we get into the online demo, everything will come together. But at least we always wanted to set up a nice comprehensive overview of the platform and from a verbal standpoint, and then jump right in. So in terms of how is SEEC ClearPath different from CACP, our old desktop application, or other emission software platforms? Well, first and foremost, it supports both protocols. So whether you're doing a municipal inventory or community scale inventory, and also it provides that platform because all of the both tracks have been designed based on both of those protocols. We have calculation of key indicators across sectors to provide additional context and community efficiency metrics like per capita consumption or per square foot consumption. And then again, we have the integrated and highly detailed forecast and planning modules that connect automatically with the inventory data. We have user control over key emission factors for enhanced localization of results. And then also a really exciting functionality of SEEC ClearPath is multi-jurisdictional access for regional organizations and multiple users for each jurisdiction. So for any local government, we usually allow up to like 4 or 5 users or logins for each local government account. But if you are a regional agency like South Bay City's COG or Ventura County Regional Energy Authority or Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, those actually become supervisory entities that can reside over all jurisdictions in their area. So we've really seen a huge uptick in terms of getting local governments to collaborate with their COGs or their association of governments to get data into this platform. Again, all data is stored in the cloud for easy access, easy and secure access. There's no more software updates or anything like that to wreak havoc with local government staff. And then all of your data can be exported in CSV files, and you can capture all the charts and graphs as JPEGs or PNGs to put into any sort of presentations you will have. So as I mentioned, who can access SEEC ClearPath California? Well, at the moment, user permissions can be provided to any local government staff member. If you're a California regional agency that's working with a California local government, you can get access to those particular local governments you're working with. Any consultants working with local governments on climate and energy planning can get access only to their local governments that they're working with. Again, interns and students also working with local governments can get access to the specific local governments they've identified. And then again, just to let folks know in terms of the user access, it's not as though you log on to this platform and you can see everybody's work. You log on and you're restricted to only the access to the local governments you're working with. So users only have access to the particular local government account unless the user is a consultant or regional agency, which in that case they actually get access to as many as they're working with. So I can give you an example of South Bay City's COG. They're working with Atkins on developing new inventories and measures, and so South Bay City's COG has access to the 18 cities in their region, along with Atkins has access to those cities as well. So it's really a great collaborative approach to get those folks in the platform without having to go local government to get their data into the platform. So we're seeing a huge uptick in terms of regionalism and helping local governments feel like they're part of a collective region as opposed to just one-off local governments working by themselves. So in terms of the SEEC ClearPath interface, again, it is the way in which we design this is we set it up the same way we set it up with the 5 milestones. We want local governments to go through milestones 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 to really give them that guiding light towards comprehensive strategic planning around actions and greenhouse gas emissions. So again, it starts with the inventory module. Again, we have 2 tracks. We have the municipal track and the community scale track. You can either start with either one. There's no right way to start. It all depends on the data and the scope of work you have. And from there, it actually moves into the forecast module, which is great because you have the opportunity to either manually create new forecasts, or you actually can port in automatically all your data from the inventory module, which is a huge step in the right direction because, you know, most of the work does start and take in terms of getting all the inventory data into the inventory module, but after that you can see the platform really takes off and becomes a much more integrated and streamlined system. So once you set up your forecast and you set up your business as usual forecast for each one of your sectors. All of that information is then ported over automatically into the planning module, and this is the really exciting place where local governments and the CivicSpark members can really get into the nitty-gritty of what mitigation measures are going to get local governments to their reduction targets. And then finally, we have the monitoring module, which again serves as the project management platform to assess and monitor and track each one of the mitigation measures that have been set up in the planning scenario. And the really great part about the SEEC ClearPath interface is there's help and instructions at every stage of the action plan or of the module itself. In terms of methodology of calculations and format for SEEC ClearPath, around the LGO track methodology, again, as I mentioned, it's structured in tune with the LGOP version 2 based on operational control in scopes 1, 2, and 3 for direct and indirect emissions. And the community track methodology is also structured by the U.S. Community Protocol for Sources and Activities, but it does also utilize the global reporting call for scoping framework. So if folks are looking at making sure that your community scale track is in tune with the international protocol, then we do have scoping terminology as well that's automatically identified as you enter your data into the community platform or the community sector. So just a little snapshot on current California local government users of SEEC ClearPath California. It's really exciting. Since the launch of the full system back in March, it was the inventory forecasting and planning module, and then we just released the monitoring module this past month, that we've seen a really huge uptick in terms of only having a few local governments at the beginning of the year, and now we have over 150 local governments that have registered. And in terms of real active users that we're collaborating with, the City of Richmond, the City of Alameda, Ventura County, which is actually, and Merced County was actually running its energy action plan through SEEC ClearPath. I'm working closely with the City of Riverside. They will be running their climate action plan through SEEC ClearPath. Palo Alto is getting its inventory data involved. Also Monterey. Monterey is actually the first local government in the state to use this platform to inform its climate action plan. And we really saw that the City of Monterey did an incredible job of getting in the inventory module, doing a different series of forecasting, and then moving it all into the planning scenario, and actually taking that to City Council and taking it to community stakeholder engagement meetings and really showing them the power of this platform and its interactivity. San Luis Obispo County is actually doing work on behalf of all the jurisdictions in their county, as well as the City of San Luis Obispo. Solano Beach is moving through its climate action plan with SEEC ClearPath, and then as mentioned, there's a huge push for COGs to be collaborating with their local governments in their region. So South Bay City's COG in the South LA area, VCREA is working with their 12 jurisdictions in the county. AMBAG is actually helping the 21 jurisdictions in Monterey and Santa Cruz County, and we've got a double, sorry about that. And then also we've collaborated very closely with the RCEA for the jurisdictions in Humboldt County. So why don't we've been chatting for about 25 minutes, or about 25 minutes. So are there any questions that came up? I know, again, you haven't seen anything, and there are probably a lot of questions that are on your mind, but I think once we get into the platform, things will clear up quite quickly. But again, as I mentioned, we always feel it's a good opportunity just to give folks a kind of a cerebral idea about the platform, and then really get into showing them visually how everything works. So in terms of the moving into the first module, so again, what you're seeing is a snapshot of the landing page. So the inventory module is very straightforward. It's here to manage emissions across the LGO and community tracks with LGO and community protocol reporting standards baked into the platform. Emission factors and other coefficients are user-defined except for stationary fuels. So for folks that are familiar with doing greenhouse gas accounting, there is always an emission factor associated with a particular activity or a source. So in this particular case, you will have to find, and we will provide resources to find solid waste emission factors. So basically the breakdown of organics that yield methane transportation emission factors, and also grid electricity emission factors based on the utility. All stationary fuels have been pre-baked into the platform, so you don't have to think about where to find those, and they're all based on the EPA's latest emission factors that are located within the community protocol. Scope, sector, and detailed reporting capabilities, along with scope and sector comparison reports for all official inventories that are available. The reporting tab is incredible because it allows folks to track their emissions visually to see if there's any reductions or increases coming over time. And again, there's help and instructions text available in every calculator and every sector. So in terms of getting started with the inventory module, the first step is to always create a new inventory. So you'll want to log into clearpath.californiaseek.org, and again, we'll go into getting access to that. Again, all regional supervisors will have one account that we'll set up. And then from there, if folks need some additional ones, once they start working with local governments, we can set that up as well. So again, you'll log into SEEC ClearPath California. You'll click on the government or community scale track, and as you saw on the last page, let me just go back to that one quick. So see here, you have a community scale track here and a local government track here. So again, in order to get into either of those tracks, you have to click on either one of these icons. So again, we're going to click on New Inventory, and then you're going to label your inventory correctly with your jurisdiction's name, and then select the year and the global warming assessment. So yeah, we always recommend that local governments identify whether or not it's their baseline inventory and what year. And also you want to make sure the status is in progress until it's been completed and spot checked, then you can convert it to complete. You always want to mark the baseline and re-inventories as official inventories because that's the only way the reporting, the comparative reports section will be able to read which inventories are official. And then last but not least is the global warming potential option. For local governments that will be starting from scratch, there's a hearty debate about what global warming potentials to use, which the major implication is the impact of methane on the atmosphere. Again, we're using 100-year global warming potentials. The second assessment had methane at 21 times more potent than CO2. The fourth assessment actually came out and saying it was 25 times, and there's actually a fifth assessment that unfortunately hasn't been quote-unquote adopted by the EPA, and we're just trying to wait for a national consensus around that, even though the scientific community is quite certain that methane is 35 times more potent. And not to add a proverbial hair to the inventory soup, but there is something to consider in terms of the short-term impacts of methane, which the scientific community have actually found is 80 times more potent than CO2. So over a 20-year lifespan in the atmosphere, sending up 1 ton of methane would be equivalent of sending 80 tons of carbon dioxide. So again, our platform is we're looking into hopefully maybe setting up a short-term or a 20-year cycle versus a 100-year cycle, because a lot of local governments who are planning out, they're only planning out 20 years or so. So it would seem to try to make sure those to be in concert in terms of global warming potential. But in terms of the assessments of what's available on the platform, we'd recommend using the fourth assessment if you're doing a brand new baseline or you're doing subsequent inventories. You know, going from 21 times to 25 times is about a 22% jump. So again, the main place where you will see effective emissions is the solid waste sector. But you know, in terms of the overall scope, it really won't take your emissions profile for solid waste at the community scale from, I don't know, you're basically looking for maybe 2 to 3 to 4% and going up to maybe 3 to 4 to 5 to 6%. So, but again, you always want to make sure the local government understands the impacts of global warming potentials and the differences. So be happy to discuss those further on any subsequent, when we actually get into do the hands-on training next week. So emission factors. Again, the way in which they've been set up in SEEC ClearPath is they define the carbon intensity of the sources and activities across all 3 modules of SEEC ClearPath. As I mentioned, all stationary fuels are pre-coded in SEEC ClearPath. For example, natural gas, LPG, and kerosene. This is just a snapshot of the 6 different factor sets that are available that are customizable that we'll be showing folks how to use and how to leverage in the platform. And in terms of the which factor sets are for which modules, for the inventory, you use your transportation, waste characterization, and grid electricity for inventory. For the forecast module, you use the forecast growth rates factor set. And then finally, for the planning module, you'll be using fuel prices and net present value parameters to help indicate with costs and financial implications of those measures. So in terms of the workflow of SEEC ClearPath, so once you've created your inventory profile, you'll need to create emission factors sets, because you will not be able to quantify any emissions for grid electricity or transportation or solid waste unless the factor sets are set up. So for step 1 would be to locate the source of all applicable emission factors. For grid electricity, you can find it readily available in the instructions guide for the inventory module. Again, same thing with transportation and waste characterization. I put together a SEEC ClearPath factor set cheat sheet that I'll email everyone after we complete today's webinar. So we want to label the factor set appropriately in terms of what it is, and then also select the inventory year to make sure the inventory year is identical to the factor set year. So if you have a 2005 baseline inventory and you set up your factor sets for 2010, the platform won't know what to do because it's looking for a 2010 inventory year as opposed to a 2005. And then enter all the emission factors in applicable boxes, and always make sure to spot check that. Again, once we get in the platform, we'll be able to show you exactly how all this works. Again, here are just some potential resources for factor sets, but we've created a really comprehensive factor set cheat sheet for folks to get familiar with. And I'll send everybody, I think, 4 or 5 different documents after the end of today's training. So in terms of just overall basic emissions calculations, so how does it all work? How does SEEC ClearPath work on the back end? So what you do is you take, for example, your activity data, which would be electricity consumption in the form of kilowatt hours, and then you take your emission factor, which would be CO2, CH4, and N2O in terms of kilowatt hours consumed, and then the calculator itself will end up doing the emissions estimate for you. So in terms of inventory module instruction guide, I highly recommend that after today's training that all the regional supervisors download all 4 of the documents and share them with the members so they can get started and get a little more familiar with the platform. So moving along into the forecasting module. Again, the forecast module creates projections of emissions trends based on anticipated demographic, economic, and energy changes. And we have forecast tracks for both LGO and community tracks. Again, LGO forecasting can be a little tricky, but if there are local governments that see some level of growth over the years, then we, by all means, please feel free to set up some sort of forecast growth rates for that. But primarily, we're using the forecasting module for community tracking, so we can get all the information from the inventory module to forecast out the business as usual trajectory, which will help then ultimately port that information into the planning module. As I mentioned earlier, data is linked from the inventory module to the forecast module, or the user can manually enter start values. So if you just wanted to play around with the forecast module, you can absolutely just click on the button that says enter manual start values and just start playing around and see how things function that way. So the forecast factor sets is a really important piece because this helps set up the growth rates into the pace at which emissions will be increasing over time. You can create as many growth rates as possible based on household population and job growth. And this is actually where folks will be entering the Renewable Portfolio Standard and Pavley standards, because again, this is a state level policy. It's already been enacted, and it is affecting the carbon intensity of the transportation sector and also the electricity sector. And also, we created a great growth rate calculator in order to establish compound growth rate. So again, just to circle back for a second, compound annual growth rate is how the forecast module operates. and we've set it up in 5-year increments. But again, we'll just enter the annual compound growth rate because it'll stay static every 5 years. But it can fluctuate over time. So if you wanted to see, a 5-year differences of growth rates, you can absolutely do that. You don't have to enter a static growth rate. But most local governments do find that, from 2005, from a baseline year to 2050, you will going to need a linear growth rate just for the calculator to do its job correctly. Maybe in the future there'll be an iteration where you could have a much more customizable growth forecast, but most local governments are operating under that linear fashion of growth. Again, just to review the forecast considerations, so for the residential sector, we're really looking at household growth, commercial would be job growth, and then solid waste would be a weighted average of population and job growth, or a similar indicator if you see fit. Now, the role of RPS and Pavley in forecasting is, again, as I mentioned, the Renewable Portfolio Standard mandates all IOUs. They must reach 33% renewable production by 2020, and then Pavley outlines fuel efficiency increases through 2025, and those effects will actually continue through 2049 as we keep those higher fuel efficiency vehicles on the road. Again, we made the choice to put this in there because, as I mentioned earlier, it is a statewide policy that's currently in effect, and folks just can still see some reductions in emissions over time if they're not growing as rapidly. That because the IOUs have to get to 20%, 30%, 33% renewable by 2020. We really feel like we wanted to include it in this particular module because it sets the tone to see to what extent that local action will have to take care of the rest of the emissions reductions if their growth isn't outpacing RPS or Pavley. So again, we have instructions guide for the forecast module as well. It's getting started and just some sector forecast guidance as well. So now moving into the planning module. So how the planning module works is we started with our forecast. And so within the forecast module, we'll identify growth rates by sector. And within the sectors, we'll identify each one of the quote-unquote emissions from the different sources or activities, whether it's natural gas, whether it's electricity, whether it's solid waste tonnage, whether it's VMT by fuel, or it could be wastewater energy or wastewater process emissions. Whatever is in the profile of your community scale inventory, we'll set up these particular growth indicators for each one of these sources or activities, and we do that individually. And then from there, we set out the business as usual forecast and be able to identify what emissions will look like sector by sector. So from there, you have all that data that's been already calculated for you, and now you move into the planning module, and the first step is to always set your reduction targets, which is at the max you have 3 reduction targets available. You can do a short-term, a mid-term, or a long-term, or if you just want to do a long-term, you can do that as well. So then from there, you set up your reduction strategies, which is really great. You can go in and take your current energy action plan, or if you just wanted to play around with a series of 12 different strategies that you've seen from other local governments, you can actually go in and take those as well, recreate them, and then all this information gets fed into the planning scenario where you can basically see in real time with a visual chart the overall growth of emissions across all sectors. You will be able to see each one of the reduction targets on this chart, and then also you'll be able to turn on and activate all the reduction strategies to see which ones are going to affect the planning scenario and get you to your reduction goals. Again, just a quick highlight on aligning your reduction targets. And so moving into the overall planning module, so it offers an analysis of emissions reduction. Sorry about that. It provides analysis of emissions reductions potential for climate action plan measures. And the accounting for programs that expand year over year or wear out over time. So it allows for that type of accounting to see the programs that either are going to show up for a year and end in a year, or that you want to deploy every 3 or 5 years, or that you have programs that are going to last for the next 20 years. We also have the platform or the module allows you to perform financial impact calculations to help convey the co-benefits of those measures. So in terms of, I just wanted to show a little visualization of how it works. So this would be a snapshot of the first look of the scenario, of the planning scenario, which shows 4 different sectors in a community scale business usual forecast. And we have 3 different targets. We have our 2020 target right here, our 2035, and our 2050. So as you activate the planning measures, you'll be able to start seeing that the graph starts moving itself down little by little until ultimately it lands on this particular scenario. So as you can see, based on a series of measures, the business usual forecast was accelerating pretty quickly, but because of this robust series of measures, it actually decreased significantly by their 2050 goal. It didn't get all the way down there, but in terms of for folks visualizing what it will take to get to their targets, this is really a wonderful platform to do that. So the next slide, I wanted to chat a little bit about evaluation of interactions. So what we were trying to, our goal was to account for these interactions, but it's also helpful to follow a specific order of evaluation for the related types of measures. And you know, it's always important. We recommend to have a simple rule to always evaluate from the outer, more universal measures to the smaller scale site level or individual behavior measures that are shown in this figure. As we do so, we can take the new measures from the previous measure into account as we drill down into the smaller scale. So SEEC ClearPath California follows this order as it applies measures to the planning scenario. So again, we take the state level RPS and Pavley standards. We couple that with any site energy technology change, whether you want to put in local coding or building system measures. It also takes into consideration whether or not you've created some measures that deal with operational change at the site level. And then last but not least, looking at end-use change or behavior change, which ultimately is the quote-unquote the elephant in the room in terms of climate action planning, is how do we get folks to change their behavior to be a part of this comprehensive plan to reduce emissions. So in terms of emission reduction calculation, so just wanted to get folks sorry, one second. So what I want to folks to get an understanding about is as we make the electricity grid cleaner, so in this particular case the kilograms of CO2e per kilowatt hour, this actually reduces the emissions associated with every kilowatt hour consumed, which then reduces the community's total electricity emissions. However, at the same time, it also reduces the emissions associated with every kilowatt avoided when an energy efficiency measure is implemented. So, you know, if we don't take this into account, then we'll be systematically overestimating emissions reductions from our actions and will not meet our reduction goals. So, you know, as we're always saying, you know, energy efficiency first, then clean energy production. So we want to make sure that you know, as we're decreasing our actually the grid as well, or the way in which we're receiving our energy, we also want to make sure that we deploy energy efficiency measures to reduce the actual energy load. So putting those two together, we'll actually get the greatest reduction of emissions. So I just wanted to return to talk about one quick thing before we move forward in terms of just this electricity emissions equation, is to understand how an emissions planning scenario is generated. So first, the forecast carbon intensity is recalculated for each future year. It takes into account any reduction measures that change the carbon intensity, such as adding renewable energy to the grid. Then the forecast energy usage for the sector is recalculated again, accounting for reduction measures that actually reduce electricity use. And then finally, forecast emissions for the sector are recalculated for each year using the updated usage and carbon intensity. So implementation over time is another incredibly important component of the planning scenario or the planning module. And the tool allows the projection of the changing impact of reduction measures over time rather than just a snapshot. folks may understand, if they have some background in climate action planning, that many measures have a cumulative impact that increases over time, such as programs that replace a certain number of appliances or weatherize a certain number of homes each year. And also many land use and transportation measures also take time to reach their full impact. Other measures such like retrofitting of a single government building just have a one-time impact. But at the same time, we always want to recognize that equipment and appliances wear out after a period of time, and the efficiency benefit is lost. So the way in which the tool works for this is by adding back the reduced activity at the end of the useful life. So this table right in front of you shows the impact of a program that is implemented for 10 years, and the life of the equipment installed is 5 years. The benefit increases for the first 5 years of the program. For the next 5 years, the benefit is static as the new implementation balances equipment wearing out. Then the benefit gradually decreases after the end of the program, finally returning to the business as usual. So again, we'll be able to dive a little deeper into the actual measures next week when we do the planning and monitoring hands-on training. But again, I just wanted to give folks food for thought in terms of how implementation over time works within the planning module. So finally, last but not least, the monitoring and tracking module. So why monitor? So we want to monitor because we want to figure out which measures are effective. We want to monitor because we want to know how much progress we've made within each one of those measures and how they're cumulatively working together to get us to our reduction targets. And we also want to see what else is going on with monitoring and tracking. At the same time, it also is difficult to explain. In terms of known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns, we have a really good understanding of measurable impacts. But our known unknowns are fuel prices and weather, which have a lot to do with the way in which energy can be consumed. The unknown unknowns are also behavior change and new technology. The way in which SEEC ClearPath works is it just operates under a current status. We don't know what things are. We don't know how things are going to be in the future, whether technology will increase or decrease. We've allowed the user to make those assumptions, but we were not able to make a platform that takes assumptions for everyone. So from the module standpoint, we add bottom-up context to the results of an inventory, and we provide the understanding. We help folks understand the performance of implemented measures. And we provide a centralized location for keeping track of implementation activities, and hopefully to help reduce the burden of reporting on these activities. But what the monitoring module does not do is help with any evaluation of the measures. So it doesn't provide any context of what you should do or what you shouldn't do. It's just strictly a project management module and platform. So this is just a quick peek at the implementation impact reports. So the way it works is it takes the measure from the planning scenario, and it establishes the planned impact of that. If in this particular case, looking at an LED light bulb project that a local government wants to replace 5,000 street lights, we could say, or 5,000 LED lights in all of their municipal buildings. So they want to do that every year for the next 5 years. So they have that set in stone, and they also know the potential reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from each one of those. So again, this is a huge number, but we're looking at 500,000 metric ton reduction. So what a local government would do is actually go in and then figure out how many light bulbs they actually implemented or swapped out. And if they, in this particular 5-year span, the local government implemented 3,000 in 2013, 6,500 in the next 2 years, and then 5,000 for the final 2 years. The way in which the monitoring module will do is actually show you the impact gap of the amount of units that need to be potentially in place, potentially deployed, and then also the impact gap of the metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. All right, well, we hit about 11:05. Again, it was probably pretty much of a bull rush through this, but again, we don't want to spend too much time going through kind of the cerebral analysis or understanding of the platform, but we do just want to give a primer and understanding of how it works in terms of the integration. So again, resources for SEEC ClearPath. This is the link to the website. Once you get registered, you have a login. Again, we have PDF instruction documents on SEEC ClearPath Inventory, Forecast, Planning, and Monitoring module, which is located on the home page. And then we also have on-demand e-trainings via California SEEC website for each module, and also a CACP data migration. So for folks, for the regional supervisors, you can feel free to register for californiaseek.org and provide that login to your members to help them get access to the e-trainings as well. So let's jump into the platform. So I think we could probably answer a few questions. So I'll take a couple moments before we get started. So any questions just based on the information we have? I know probably a lot of them will be answered once we actually dive into the platform. Okay, well again, if folks have any questions, but it definitely sounds like they probably will once we get into the platform and actually show you how the system works. Give me 1 second, we'll pull this up. Okay. So can everybody see the screen right now? Okay, good. So again, let's start with the California SEEC.org website. So for folks who want to register for access to the trainings and resources, here's the link right here. I have a final follow-up resources slide at the end of the presentation today. But again, folks can register for access to SEEC right here. And then in terms of software tools, they can also access, you can help set up your account for SEEC ClearPath. So again, for all the regional supervisors that are working with CivicSpark, we ask you to basically establish your organization name here, because we're going to create an account for you based on your regional organization, as opposed to giving you access to a local government. It's a lot easier just to set up this sample account, and then once you start working with local governments, or the members start working with actual local governments that we have in our system, we can just tie them to your account. So in terms of getting set up, so folks will go to clearpath.californiaseek.org, and then you'll enter your username and your password, which usually is your email address, and then you can set up a password. So from there, you actually log straight into this platform, and what you will say is a very nice user interface that provides a little context here, but here we have all of the inventory, all of the forecast, the module instruction guides available to you just at a click of a button. So for folks who want to take a look at this, this is a really great resource for the inventory module and the forecast module. We also have instruction guides for the planning and monitoring. So again, it's just a click away. As we scroll down, we'll see there are two tracks. We have our government track. This is where you'll put all your information and planning information around municipal operations. Again, just always keep in mind operational control. And if any folks want to get a link to the local government operations protocol, this is where it is. So again, it's just a click away. It'll take you to the climate registry. And you can download this for free. In terms of the community scale track, this house, with just a click of a button, will take you to the community scale, which is where you'll be monitoring the majority of the emissions in the community as well. Again, it provides a link to the U.S. Community Protocol, and you'll be able to register for that and download the latest version. So in terms of today, I usually like to start with the community scale track and spend about 15 minutes here, then jump in the government operations track as well. So when you click on the government scale track, it takes you to the inventory landing page. And it also shows you up here, this is the first time you see this row of buttons, or at least sections of the platform available to you. These are identical on both the community scale and the municipal operations track. They're just separated by those two tracks. So again, we have home, about SEEC. Factor sets is where you enter all your factor sets across all the four modules. Inventories brings you back to this landing page for all the inventories that you have available. Again, forecast will take you to the landing page for all the forecasts that you've created. This would take you to the landing page of the planning scenario, the monitoring module, and then finally reports. Again, we have a robust reporting system that provides inventory reports, monitoring reports, and then also forecast and planning exports. Again, we'll get into a little more of the nitty-gritty moving forward, but just wanted to give folks a sense of the user interface. So again, at any click of the button will bring you back to the sector or the module that you're working on. So again, for the sake of this demo, I wanted to show folks a baseline inventory and a re-inventory. So for folks who are just starting from scratch, what you want to do is click on the new inventory and then just establish that. So I'll just go through the process of doing it just so we have the information available, so in case folks need to take a look at it again. So it would be CivicSpark again, this is just a demo entry, CivicSpark Community Baseline Inventory. And again, because it's a 2005 inventory, we want to mark it as 2005. It's in progress. We want to mark this as the official inventory. And then again, if we're just entering old data, we'll keep it at the second assessment. But if we're starting from scratch, we can put it as the fourth assessment. So now we go back to here. So one thing to remember is that, as you can see, I marked this as official. I had a previous 2005 inventory as official, so you cannot have two official inventories from the same year. So again, just for the sake of this particular demo, I'm going to actually take this off and not have this as official, but I just want to show you how to create an inventory. So again, now that we created inventory, let's take a look at factor sets. Again, these are not pre-populated for you. It's because this is our demo entry, our demo account. I've created a slew of different factor sets, but let's start with grid electricity. So again, the information you will need is just finding the name of the utility. You'll select the inventory year, make sure it's consistent with that particular baseline inventory year, and then the information here for this CO2 pounds per megawatt hour, CH4 pounds per gigawatt hour, and N2O pounds per gigawatt hour. That's all available for you, since in the state of California we provided this great instructions guide, and at the bottom, I believe it's page 15 and 16, you can actually extract that information from this chart right here. So again, for 2005 inventory from PG&E, again, just to close in a little bit, again, the figure for that would be 489.16, and then since the utilities don't produce CH4 and N2O factors, because they always view it as de minimis, as it's not contributing more than, I think it's not even close to 1% of overall grid electricity emissions. They don't report that, but the CEC, the California Energy Commission, provides average emission factor sets for CH4 and N2O. Maybe a little confusing, but this first row right here is CH4, even though I didn't identify it. And the second row is pounds of N2O per gigawatt hour. So we just scroll down to 2005 and see that it's 30 pounds per gigawatt hour CH4 and 11 pounds of CH4, 11 pounds of N2O per gigawatt hour. So again, you just find that information and enter it in here, and once you're done, you just click Save the Factor Sets, and now you have your first grid electricity factor set. We do want to go back, and since we'll be collecting hopefully information on solid waste, again, solid waste characterization, these are all done in whole percentages, so it's not 0.013, it's 1.3. The way in which this works is we're only trying to calculate the organic waste that will ultimately break down in the landfill that will yield methane emissions. That's the only thing we're trying to quantify. Plastics don't do it. Any of the non-organics, we're not worried about that because they're not generating greenhouse gas emissions. That doesn't mean they're not relevant, but from a standpoint of greenhouse gas accounting, we're just looking at different organic compounds that are going to break down in the landfill. We have provided factor sets from Cal Recycle's 2005 and 2008 waste profile, which is their most recent community scale waste characterization. So they're coming out with a new factor set in 2015 for 2014. But as of right now, local governments are using the same waste characterization profile, whether you're in Solano Beach or whether you're up in Eureka or Oakland or San Francisco. But again, it'll be up to local government whether they want to actually update that. But we always leave. We always want local governments to influence their measures in the planning module, because that's the place where you can have the most control over reducing emissions as opposed to tinkering with it in the inventory module. Again, we have all those factor sets available for you. Now for the transportation, just for food for thought, we're looking for miles per gallon for fuel type and vehicle type, and then also grams of CH4 and N2O by fuel type and vehicle type as well. Again, all depends upon the work in which you're doing in the transportation sector, but we wanted to make sure that folks have this available to them to get the most comprehensive information. Again, in the community protocol, again, we have a resource sheet on the transportation appendix that has all of these fuel efficiency standards and also grams of CH4 per mile. So now, since we've set these three factor sets up, now we can jump back into the inventory module now. So again, we're going to go into the SEEC Field Training 2005 Community Inventory module. So in order to get into the actual inventory itself, we're going to click on Edit Records, and we're going to see we land on just the residential energy. We land on the first tab, which is residential energy. So for folks who are wondering how we go from here to here, so when we click on Edit Records, we move into now a fully baked community inventory platform, and it's set up with all of the sectors that are available that are in tune with the U.S. Community Protocol. So residential energy, commercial energy, industrial energy, transportation and mobile sources, water and wastewater, agricultural solid waste, any additional processed and fugitive emissions, along with upstream impacts of activities and consumption-based accounting. Again, upstream impacts and consumption-based accounting have to be done externally. We don't have any calculators inside of these sectors at the moment. So again, the platform is set up, every sector is set up identically in terms of workflow, but you will have different calculators in each different sector. But in terms of the interface, when you click on any one of these sectors, you're always going to have available calculators right here in the main left panel of the page. To the right part, we always have inventory records that you have created. And then down below, we have CO2e for current category. So as you enter new records and save them, they populate into this bar chart. And you can actually save any of these ongoing charts once you enter records as a PNG, a JPEG, or a PDF, or a vector image. As you enter more data across all the sectors within the community inventory, this just is a pre-populated, it's more of just a visual reference as opposed to anything that you'd want to extract, but we just wanted to show that for this particular inventory you can see that they've included transportation, commercial energy, residential, water and wastewater, and solid waste. Again, this all gets pre-populated as you enter more information within the sectors. Okay, we have our first question. Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Julie. Of course. So for residential energy, we have three available calculators right now. We have emissions from grid electricity, emissions from stationary fuel combustion, and emissions from stationary fuel combustion user-supplied emission factors. We really don't recommend anybody use this one because this is for really, in all my work, I'm across a single local government who's used this calculator. But as you can see, we have a little help text right here, a little question mark. This will actually pop up and show you exactly how the calculator computes emissions from grid electricity according to the community protocol method built environment 0.2.1. It shows you the calculation of electricity, CO2, CH4, and N2O, and it shows you the community reporting framework. We're marking this as an activity. Again, same time, a help text right here for stationary fuel combustion. And so you have the option to click on any of these. Again, I do want to reiterate there. Right now, the way the platform works is it's operating under the assumption that you know where to go. So our recommendation is that you always start from left to right, that you start with residential energy information, you start with then commercial energy information. You do not have to enter information in all of these sectors. You only have to enter information into the sectors that your local government is scoped within per the community protocol. Most likely you'll be entering data in residential energy, commercial energy, transportation, water and wastewater if applicable, and then also solid waste. It's up to the local governments to include any industrial energy data if they have that, along with agricultural emissions or community scale process and fugitive emissions. And then again, it's entirely up to the scope of work for the community inventory to include upstream impacts or consumption based. So I just want to hopefully hammer that in again. There is at no point will this platform ever tell you and be kind of be in a supervisory role of saying like, oh, you've only entered one or two sectors, do you want to complete them? Again, it's operating under the assumption that you have some idea which sectors you want to include and which areas to go to. So again, just want to reiterate, most likely you'll just be entering information in residential energy, commercial energy, oops, sorry, just clicked on that, transportation and mobile sources, water and wastewater, and solid waste. But again, it's entirely up to the local governments if they want to take a step further and enter into the other resulting sectors. So let's go into a record real quick now and take a look at how the calculator works. So as you can see, it marks with the new inventory record for emissions from grid electricity. Again, question mark, it brings you back to the same help text. So now this is where we get started. We start with our name. So again, we're just going to do one or two entries just so folks can see how the platform works. So this would be, again, you want to say residential electricity consumption, okay? Again, you always want to label these records consistently so that year over inventory, you know exactly what you're getting. Since this is a 2005 inventory, the factor set automatically populates right here. The grouping tags is a way in which for local governments to actually track these individual records over time and in conjunction with the monitoring module. Again, for folks that really are going to get into this, we can do that offline with some additional technical assistance. But for right now, I just want to get folks familiar with just the dynamics of each one of these calculators. If you want to mark this as an information item, that allows you to not include this towards the overall hydrocarbon, overall greenhouse gas emissions profile of this inventory. So now we've labeled it. Now we can look at whether or not this is a direct entry record. So you have two options. If you already have greenhouse gas emissions data for this record, then you can say yes. But what you will need to find is CO2, CH4, and N2O. But I do have to say there is a workaround that if you have already 2005 residential electricity consumption data from a former report, you don't want to recreate everything. You can actually enter the total carbon dioxide equivalent in the CO2 value box, also enter the electricity used, and then it'll just pre-populate everything down here. But for the sake of today, let's take a peek saying that, okay, this is not a direct entry. It was 10 million kilowatt hours. Number of households within this community, we'll say 12,000. And the population would be about 60, we'll say. So as you can see, your inputs right here, just based on these three inputs that you entered, automatically spit out all the outputs right here. So the way it works is we always want, in order for the forecast module and the planning module to work seamlessly, we have to convert all of the activity data and the resulting, energy or the resulting information into one standalone equivalent, which is always in MMBTUs. So you can take solid waste, you can take VMT for transportation, you can take process emissions, you can take everything and make them in terms of electricity energy equivalent in MMBTUs. So what we have here is, because of the factor set that we pre-populated, or that we populated, we now know that 10,000 kilowatt hours will yield 2,219 metric tons of carbon dioxide, 0.13 metric tons of CH4, and 0.04 metric tons of N2O. And then because we've marked this at the second assessment, the calculator now automatically takes the global warming potential of CH4 and N2O, multiplies that by each one of these respective figures, sums it up with the CO2, and that gets us to carbon dioxide equivalent in metric tons right here. We also have MMBTUs per household based on the information, CO2e per household, MMBTU per person, and CO2e per person as well. Again, you do not have to enter information into these boxes for number of households. The calculator doesn't say, oh, you have to do that. So again, just food for thought. It really helps with just overall indicators of the way in which the community is consuming resources. So again, once we're done, we now can go down and look at the notes. Notes is a really great opportunity to include any sort of notes of where you found this information or any reference guides. And you also can upload a file to this. So if you have remember the master data workbook, if you have any Excel workbooks or any sort of information to actually include as a frame of reference moving forward, then we highly recommend you attach that document to this particular entry. So again, we can just click Save. And now we have a new record, which was residential energy consumption right here. So let's pause for a second and see if there are any questions that come up regarding data entry, or what folks have seen thus far. Is anything confusing or anything look unfamiliar, or are there any serious questions as to how you would go about entering the information? Okay. Well, again, any questions that pop up, please feel free to enter them in the question box, and I'll get to them immediately. So again, always want to be thinking about the type of information you have and where it goes. So electricity information would go into grid electricity. Natural gas data would go in here. Again, it's the same process of entering the name of the record, so residential natural gas consumption, whether or not it's a direct entry or not. And the fuel type, this is where you can enter natural gas. And always remember, for a natural gas entry, I'll do another CivicSpark. So we want to say no. And again, here's a big thing. We always want to make sure we change the units, because it always starts with MMBTUs. Make sure they're always consistent, because the way you'll get your utility data is always in therms. So we would say 75,000 therms. Now let's do 750. Okay. And number of households, again, 12,000. Number of people, 60,000. And again, we did not need to include any emission factors for this, because as I remember, all stationary fuels are pre-coded into the platform. And we have a question. Sure. So on the previous page, there was an option to edit parameters. What does that mean? Okay, great question, Larry. So let me save this record real quick. So editing parameters, as I get back. So again, what I want to let folks know is that, okay, so we're in the community inventory track. If we want to go back to your landing page for the inventories, we want to click on the inventory button. And then here, edit parameters, what that does is it takes you back to the parameters of the inventories you've created. So if you wanted to go back and edit the name, or whether convert it from in progress to complete, or whether to make it unofficial, or change the year, you can all go ahead and edit those parameters. So that's the significance of the edit parameters button. So again, to get back to where we were, we go back to edit records. So we took a look at residential. Let's take a look at commercial. So again, commercial is set up in the same vein. It is emissions from grid electricity and stationary fuel combustion. And you'll follow the same workflow in terms of finding the name of the commercial records. So that's the built environment away from the residential sector. Again, you can enter it whether or not it's a direct entry. But here's other indicators that you can include as well in terms of commercial floor area, commercial workforce size, the number of employed people, and then the number of commercial establishments. Again, not necessary, they're just helpful indicators. Industrial energy is where you'd put information around major industrial facilities that are within your community. Most likely, folks will or will not have those, but it just depends upon whether or not you're getting information from your utility that provides industrial energy data, industrial facility energy data. This is also the place where you can include, if there is a major industrial point source emitter in your community, this is where you actually can get that information from ARB in terms of the amount of emissions it's emitting every year, and just manually enter them into this particular record. So again, it would be an entry type, whether it's individual gases or CO2e, and whether this you want to take a look at the mandatory reporting. So it indicate whether or not what this record relates to. And then finally, again, it is a straightforward entry. So if you're a community that has a major point source, whether it's an oil refinery or something that's outside of the scope of significant influence, it all depends on whether the local government wants to include it in their inventory. Some folks do include it, and they could mark it as an information item just because it allows them to keep one succinct place for all their emissions data. So transportation and mobile sources. Again, just food for thought. Folks, please ignore deprecated because we're moving this one out. So the three main calculators you want to focus on are updated, on-road transportation, emissions from public transit if applicable, and then emissions from off-road mobile sources if applicable. So again, there's help text here. I would recommend that everybody take a moment and review these. The help text here, it really gives you a great understanding of what the calculator is doing on the back end in terms of all of the particular ways to calculate emissions from the transportation sector. So let's just say theoretically we'll want to go in and take a look at on-road transportation. So again, since we've already pre-populated the factor set, it automatically popped up right here. And so you'll have options as to calculate your emissions from vehicle miles traveled and miles per gallon per vehicle type. And that one allows you have to do this always by fuel type. So one thing folks need to take into consideration when doing the transportation emissions is that the calculator will only work seamlessly through all of the modules if you identify the information by each fuel type. So you'll have to have two records, one for gasoline and then one for diesel. Most likely MPOs do provide that information, but if not, the workaround is to then extrapolate out the difference of gasoline vehicle miles traveled and diesel vehicle miles traveled from MFAC at the county level. So again, for this particular record, you would want to go in and take the total number of vehicle miles traveled, and then figure out what percentage that is based on the different vehicle types that are operating within the community. Again, ultimately, if you want to include population, you can do that as well. For on-road factor, this is another conversation that would probably take a good hour to go through, but what this provides you is an opportunity to find and calculate, or at least to include CO2, CH4, and N2O on-road average emission factors for each fuel type. I have an MFAC CO2 cheat sheet for folks if they want to take a look at that and get familiar with that. It's part of this training program. I don't want to get too much into it, but this basically means you would find a CO2 emission factor for all vehicle types that are consuming gasoline and all vehicle types that are consuming diesel from the MFAC county scale, from the MFAC calculator, excuse me. Fuel use is another option. However, we don't recommend that too often. Again, it just gives you a consumption, a VMT, or sorry, a transportation emissions profile based on the number of gallons consumed. And then finally, a direct entry for folks who actually already have transportation emissions data from previous inventories. We give you a great opportunity to just enter the CO2e or CO2, CH4, and N2O in these three value boxes as well. So water and wastewater, again, I'm going to just, for the sake of time, again, I hope folks can realize that it takes a little while to get through this in terms of just understanding how everything works. But I just want to show what are available calculators in wastewater and water and water treatment. So we have all the types of water treatment facilities, along with wastewater treatment facilities, along with the emissions related to energy use. Again, the agricultural sector is pretty much, you'll have to enter emissions outside of the calculator and do those emissions per the protocol. For solid waste, we provide 5 different calculators for waste generation by the community in jurisdiction landfills. So if a local government has a landfill within its boundaries, the collection and transportation emissions involved with transporting the waste to and from the landfills. And then whether or not there's any in-boundary combustion of solid waste or incineration, and then additionally combustion of solid waste generated by the community. So we have also process and fugitive emissions. Again, as we mentioned, most local governments do take, originally we had 6 greenhouse gases, but now we usually kind of focus just on the 3, but we do give you an opportunity to track HFCs and PFCs in these 2 tabs as well. And then finally, upstream impacts, or second to last, upstream impacts of activities and consumption based. So again, we provide all of these opportunities for local governments to take a peek at the upstream impact of electricity and fuels used by the community, along with electric power, transportation, and distribution losses, transmission and distribution losses. And then finally, the consumption-based emission calculator. Again, so it would have to be previously calculated. So you'd want to go in, if you wanted to include like food, like goods and services, community scale emissions, you'd have to go to an outside source and actually do the calculation and then input the information here. Great. So any questions on the community scale track? So I'm gonna just walk folks. I'll walk us through the municipal track now, and then we can look at reports and then do a quick peek at forecasting and planning and monitoring. Again, hopefully this will give folks just a good comprehensive idea about the platform, and then next week we can really dive in and get you into actually entering data and getting more familiar with 2 modules at a time, as opposed to trying to introduce all 4 at once. So in order to get back to, if you want to go look at municipal operations, you want to always click Home and then click on the government track. So again, it's set up in the same vein. Edit records, edit parameters, and whether or not you want to delete it. The factor sets are now exchangeable between community and municipal operations. So we want to go into the 2005 municipal inventory that we've set up. And again, it's the same overall system in terms of our workflow, where we have available calculators, inventory records, the CO2e by current category, but then CO2e across all sectors. But the difference is we now have a different ecosystem because we're dealing with municipal inventories. And so the primary sectors that we have in a municipal operations inventory are buildings and facilities, street lights, vehicle fleet, transit fleet that's owned and operated by the local government, employee commute, whether or not the local government provides electric power production, any solid waste facilities, including Scope 3 local government generated waste, water and wastewater treatment facilities, and then any process or fugitive emissions that are related with government operations. So first and foremost, the buildings and facilities tab. So again, for most folks that are working with a municipality on their inventory, the sectors that you'll be entering data into will be buildings and facilities, street lights and traffic lights, street lights and traffic signals, vehicle fleet. It all depends on whether the local government actually owns any transit, public transit that the community is using. Employee commute. Most likely they won't be entering in electric power production. There's only a few local governments that have munis. Actually not a few, but there are. And then solid waste facilities, whether or not you want to include Scope 3 generated waste by the municipal operations, or if any of the local governments actually own solid waste facilities, as in landfills. And again, in here, water and wastewater treatment facilities that are owned and operated by the local government. So in terms of available calculators for buildings and facilities, we have how to calculate emissions from grid electricity, stationary fuel combustion, and then emissions from electric power transmission and distribution losses, along with steam and district heating purchases, district cooling, and then any heat and power purchases from combined CHP or from CHP plants. Again, street lights and traffic signals, pretty straightforward in terms of you'll just be collecting kilowatt hours for the street lights and traffic lights. Vehicle fleets, we're just looking for vehicle emissions from on-road, and then also if you want to include off-road emissions as well. Employee commute would be straightforward. We're just entering the employee commute profile that again will have to be done. Have to be calculated externally. Actually, not externally, but you'll have to do a fair amount of work on the outside to get familiar with that. And then local government-owned landfills are available, and then this is the waste generation by the local government itself. So we just want to know how many tons of waste that are landfilled, and then we also want to know within the receiving landfill whether it has a landfill gas capture system or methane collection, which actually helps either collect the methane to be flared off or collect it to be reused to power the facility. Those are questions you'll have to ask and figure out whether or not the receiving landfill has that technology. So water and wastewater is a pretty robust sector in terms of all the particular facilities that a local government can own and operate and the processes that go into treating wastewater and water. And then finally, for process and fugitive emissions, we have, again, a very similar calculator. The community scale is how to enter hydrofluorocarbon and refrigerant emissions. Again, we have a selection of different varying gases. And then finally, any other process or fugitive emissions that you'll need to include the gas quantity and the gas and CO2 equivalent, and then it'll pump out the outputs down here. All right, so we kind of blew through the municipal operations track, but I wanted to get to reports. So since I clicked on the reports, it took me to the my reports that are associated with the municipal inventory. So again, it shows you here, we have the name of the reports, the description, the inventories that are available, and the actions that are available to you. So again, we're just going to start with inventory reports and take a look. So as you see, we have inventory by scope, which includes CO2e by scope for the selected inventory year. You can either view it on an interactive chart right here. So it shows you scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions based on the information that you entered. You also can export that as a CSV as well. Second report is inventory by sector, and this will show you a bar chart of all of the emissions it's summed up based on each sector. So buildings and facilities, wastewater treatment, vehicle fleet, solid waste facilities, streetlights and traffic signals, and employee commute. Great thing about this is you actually can toggle in and out. So you actually can just look at the built environment and see what kind of emissions are coming, and we can see it's a pretty significant chunk. We're working on getting percentages as well, but it's nice to have this in interactive. So when you go to a meeting or actually show to any external stakeholders or internal stakeholders, you can provide this type of visualization for them. So the detailed report actually provides a overall detailed analysis of all the entries that you've provided. So if folks are looking for a detailed report that has every single entry, you can export this as a CSV, and I'll just show you how it looks real quick. Okay, so this has all the records available to you that you put into this for this particular entry. It basically starts with your inventory record, the calculator that we use, the factor profiles, any tags that you included, whether or not it's an information item, the category itself, the tags in terms of scoping, who it was created by and when, the fuel use. Again, it's all applicable on the different types of entries, but as you can see, all the data is here, and it kind of goes on a little too long, but what we're on the verge of actually creating is a new CSV export that would go by sector. So you would have buildings and facilities, you would have street lights, all the sectors that you have entered data into would be produced in a nice, succinct, and easy to read CSV file. Then finally, we can look at inventory comparison by scope, and this is the comparison of CO2e by scope and year over all official inventories. So if you don't mark your inventory as official, the comparative reporting functionality won't be activated. So we can take a look at all emissions by scope within the 2 years. So within baseline to 2010, so scope 1 to scope 2, we actually saw a oh, that's weird. Oh, scope 3, sorry. We saw a decrease from 2005 to 2010. From scope 2, we saw a nice decrease as well in terms of electricity emissions, but scope 1, we saw a small increase. So this is a really great way, and you can actually turn these on and off and just look at the scope 1s. So a little increase right here. We're still working on percentages and hopefully maybe some more indicators down below to show you a percentage increase or decrease. Just want to look at scope 2, we can turn these on and off. And then finally scope 3 we can turn off, and it again adjusts. And so you can export all of these figures, all of these charts as you see fit. And again, finally, we'll take a look at the inventory comparison by sector. So this shows you a bar chart of the emissions by overall sectors within the municipal inventory of all official inventories. So again, you can toggle in and out and just look at vehicle fleet over time. See that there's a small increase right here. We want to just look at buildings and facilities. We actually saw a nice decrease here. And again, as I mentioned, you can export these at any time, at any point where you want to just look at different isolated sectors. So it's really wonderful to provide this platform that's available to local governments so they can actually visually see what kind of information is available to them and show them from a visual standpoint of their progress in terms of getting to emissions reductions. So I'd like to jump right into the forecast module. Are there any questions? The way in which the community track, the reports are absolutely identical. So no, actually, there's only one small difference in the community scale track is we just have sources and activities. So we go to reports. We have by scope, activity and source sector, and then the detail report, but then virtually identical the same sector. So if we want to pull this up, we can see the same type of progress, same type of chart in terms of pulling this up. So we just want to look at actual identical. So again, this fictitious local government saw pretty significant emissions reductions from 2005 to 2010, without having entered into any sort of planning scenario or depending upon the type of measures that they already had, but just based off of the activity they got or the activity data we created. So any questions on the forecast module? Oh, sorry, the inventory module? Okay. Again, any questions that pop up, just please let me know. So now into forecasting. So again, to go from inventory to forecasting, it's as easy as clicking on this button right here. It brings you to the forecast landing page where you can actually create a new forecast here. And the way we do that is very simply just say CivicSpark training number 2 forecast. It gives you options to either use start values from inventory or enter manual start values. And we want to basically start from, again, always doing a baseline, starting with our baseline. So we start with 2005, and we want to look at an end year of 2050. We click Save, and now we've created a new forecast. And we've set it up in the same vein as when creating a new inventory record. You can edit the records that will go into the forecast module. You can edit the parameters, again, going back, looking at it. Or if you want to actually go ahead and delete it, you can click here, and there's a fail-safe right here that asks you if you're sure you want to delete the forecast. So now that we've clicked on Edit Records on the community scale track, as you can see, since I automatically ported in all of my data, as you can see, we have electricity energy equivalent, the quantity in MMBTUs, the quantity of CO2e, same thing for natural gas, and then now we also had propane for this particular sample entry. Okay? So what we want to do is take a peek and just call this again, we'll label it just to make sure that we know. I just want to make a clear labeling of this. We want to mark it as official. And then for the sake of time, you're going to have to create all these growth forecasts in the factor set tab. But I just want to show you in terms of like a high household growth, the carbon intensity factor, you want to label that with RPS. Again, the only time we have a carbon intensity factor is with grid electricity and also transportation. For transportation, we'll be using Pavley. Again, we want to put a high household growth with for natural gas, and then also click on this for propane as well, because those are the 3 entries that we have. Just want to scroll down to make sure there are no other entries. Again, you don't need to have any values in any of the empty boxes. We just did that for consistency's sake. So now we've marked it as official. We can click Save right here. And now it populates a business as usual forecast based on all 3 of the entries that all 3 of the energy sources that you've entered. So energy, electricity, natural gas, and propane. So as you can see, starting in 2005, we had a pretty limited amount of emissions, but then by 2050, because of really high household growth rate, we're seeing a pretty big swoop or increase in emissions. We can actually toggle on and off between each of the factors, each of the emission sources. So as you can see, because of the Renewable Portfolio Standard, we actually saw when it got activated in 2010, we're actually hopefully going to see a decrease in emissions from 2010 to 2020. But as you see, it just shoots up quite rapidly because we're not sure whether there will be an RPS standard involved. You can actually go into the forecast growth rates and actually play around with that if you'd like, but because we don't have a looking glass and we can't make that assumption, we just have to go with best available data. And again, you can export any of these images as you see fit. And another great component is you can do an export for this, and it spits out a CSV file that will show you the growth or the decrease of CO2 and MMBTU. So as you can see, starting in 2010, the usage is going up because of household growth, but as you can see, emissions are going down because of the RPS standard went into effect. So starting with 77,546 tons of CO2e, by 2019, which is pretty much at the end of the calendar year, hopefully emissions will drop down to 6,342, even though energy consumption is going up because the grid's getting cleaner. So now that we say that record, again, the whole process of the rest of the sectors is you'll only be looking at information that you actually have. Again, the commercial energy got automatically ported in. The transportation information from my inventory baseline got ported in automatically, and then same thing with water and wastewater. Just the annual digester for this particular case, and then solid waste. So it'll just be up to you to scroll down and find and just remember which sectors you entered information and which sectors you entered information, and then set up the actual carbon intensity rate and growth rates. So let's imagine that we'll go back and I'll show you a fully baked forecast. So this one, we can go through and show you that we'll go into edit this record. This is for a residential energy forecast. Go into commercial energy. Go into edit. Again, you always want to mark these as official. Either way, it won't be ported into the planning module. So again, this is transportation of on-road gasoline and diesel. Oh, yep. Well, yeah. We'll just throw a quick growth rate in here. Let's see. Okay. And then finally, solid waste. We'll take a look here. Again, we can take a look at edit. Okay. So perfect. So now we've got, let's just say we've got all of our sectors taken care of. So again, as you said, we had to work individually with each one of these sectors, set up the appropriate growth forecast, carbon intensity factor, and then now we actually can just take a peek, go back to the forecast, settle in. We can actually look at forecast helpers as well. Great thing is if you don't have compound annual growth rate from your MPO or COG or actually general plan from the local government, you actually can go in here and create compound annual growth rate. So say if you were looking at population growth. So basically you just label it. And you put you want to start with we start with the start year value. Again, it shows you some information. So the value would be, say from your baseline you had a population of 60,000. The start year was 2005. The end year value, let's say your MPO or COG or general plan says population is going to grow to 100,000 by 2050. Then we can save that, and as you can see, the output is compound annual growth rate right here. And it shows you this rate is expressed as a decimal and should be used in your factor set in this format. If you wish to express this record as a percentage in your narrative report, then you multiply by 100. So basically, this is it's 1.1% a year growth. So you can save that, and now you have a saved compound annual growth rate for your population. So again, this doesn't automatically get put into the factor set. You'll have to take that information and actually go back, click on the factor sets, and move into the forecast growth rates. And this is where you can establish your new factor set for this. So in this particular case, we can add a new one, CivicSpark population growth. Again, it started in 2005, so it's 0.011. Again, you can just copy this and then paste it in each one of these brackets of years. They're in 5-year increments because we didn't want to have folks having to enter 50 different compound annual growth rates. And a great place is to have notes, like where you found this information. You know, a link to it or a source or a citing would be really helpful, along with how you arrived at this particular growth rate. You can save that factor set, and now you've set up a new compound annual growth rate for population. So we've gone through the inventory module, we ported all our information to the forecasting, we've set business usual forecasting for all the sectors that we have in our baseline inventory based on the growth rates and the carbon intensity. So now we can move into the planning module. So before we do into that, are there any questions, or is there anything unclear about the platform in terms of going from, you know, setting up an inventory, entering activity data, calculating emissions, looking at reports, and then how to get all the information into the forecast module, and then set up each individual sector business usual forecast. I'll give folks a minute or two to digest, and then we can move forward. I know this is a ton of information to digest at a time, but seems like everybody's following from what I'm gathering. Okay, great. So without burning too much time, let's now jump in. Oh, here we go. Perfect. Can you copy factor sets? Unfortunately, you can't. At the moment, the only way to copy factor sets, let's see. So you can use factor sets across inventories, but if you're asking if you can copy factor sets to other local governments, then no. You have to set up, every local government is set up individually. That's just the way it is. There'd be no way to set it up to where we could just copy factor sets across if you're working with different local governments. So yeah, you'll have to, every time you log into each one of the local governments you're working with, you'll have to set up those factor sets. But it's a little onerous, but it wouldn't take you more than like 15 to 30 seconds to set them up. So in terms of the planning scenario, when we click on the planning button, we arrive at the planning scenario landing page. And we have a couple different options up here. We have new planning scenario, which allows you to create a new planning scenario, self-explanatory. New reduction strategy actually shows you all the available emissions reduction measures to create. And emissions reduction goals, this is where you set your emissions reduction goals. So again, here, based on the demo that we have 3 targets. We have emission target 1, 20% by 2020. Emission target 2 is 50% by 2035. And emission target 3 is 80% by 2050. Again, these are all emission targets based on set on your baseline. So we want to go 20% below baseline by 2020, 50% below baseline by 2035, and then 80% below baseline by 2050. So again, we save those goals. Let's go back to the planning scenario. Take a look at the new reduction strategy. So again, for all folks who, when they log in and set up their SEEC ClearPath account, this will be a blank slate for you. Again, because this is the demo, we've created a slew of different reduction strategies. So on the right-hand side, on the left-hand side, we have all the available calculators, and this is where you can actually pick a calculator and enter a new record. Right in the middle is all the filter calculators, so if you're looking at, you just want to take a look at a particular sector, you actually can toggle on and off. So if you wanted to deselect all of those, they don't delete them, they just turn them off. And you just want to look at residential energy. So for residential energy, we have available calculators that deal with Title 24 residential energy, based on the 2013 standard. And again, we have information help text right here that provides you a lot of resources around what Title 24 is. We have a user-defined residential energy calculator, which is self-explanatory. This allows you to apply the results of analyses performed outside of this application, but leverage the planning scenario framework for this tool. So if you can't find a calculator that fits your reduction measure for residential energy, then you can define that yourself with this calculator. We have solar photovoltaic calculator along with green local power purchase for the residential sector. We have a residential energy efficiency calculator along with including low flow faucets. A RECO, a calculator based on Berkeley's RECO, low flow shower heads, and also increased residential solar thermal, and then low income weatherization programs. So again, we still have a little light on the calculators, and we're trying to create them as quickly as we can. You can also look at here. Here's what we have available for commercial energy. Transportation and mobile sources, we have a user-defined transportation, bike infrastructure, compact development, high-efficiency transit, and then also a user-defined for off-road mobile sources. And we're slowly creating a whole slew of solid waste calculators as well. And we're still looking at some upstream impact calculators, and then we have a user-defined water and wastewater. So again, we're still working pretty tirelessly to try to get as many calculators as possible available to local governments in the state. So for the sake of simplicity, let's take a look at this, and let's take a look at increased residential solar photovoltaic. So let's click on the help text, and this gives an explanation of how the calculator works and what it means to include, to put into place a residential solar, a residential PV program. And it gives you some examples as well, along with any reference sheet. So the way this one works is, again, this is always, this is strictly from local government perspective. So we're not talking about total cost of the systems. We're not talking about anything that the local government, quote unquote, doesn't have an influence over. So first and foremost, we should just take a look at what we have available to you. And unfortunately, I jumped the gun a little bit. So fuel prices and net present value parameters. So I would say before we get into setting up the planning scenario, you want to go down to these last two factor sets, which are fuel prices and net present value parameters. So the fuel prices, again, this is just something that you're going to have to set up on your own, which is to set up a default fuel price. Again, don't worry about the year. This is just based on best available fuel price. But if you wanted to create a variety of different fuel prices and how they indicate from your baseline year or previous years, or if you actually want to extrapolate out what fuel prices may look like, but those have to do with the net present value parameters. So you'd want to enter the price per kilowatt hour for electricity, and also price per therm for natural gas, and then include the price, again, the annual average for gasoline per gallon, diesel per gallon, any other figures here. And then here for the net present value parameters, again, the nominal discount rate, as folks all know, is 7%, so that's a default figure. You know, general inflation rate is 3%, and we have yet to find an electricity inflation rate for the state of California, along with natural gas and other petroleum or waste disposal inflation rates. So again, the best available data is the general inflation rate, so we just included those as default. So again, we've set those up now. Save the factor sets. And let's go back to the planning scenario and set up this new reduction strategy again. So again, to get back here, let's just look at the residential energy. Click on Increased Residential Solar Photovoltaic. We've got our grid electricity for our electricity. We've got the fuel prices default, net present values up default, and then again, if you want to toggle between the global warming potential, you can actually do that here as well. So this would be a residential PV deployment or uptake, whatever the name that's consistent with the climate action plan. So the first question is, again, it's the same process where you set up the inputs and then you get outputs. So by beginning, you want to figure out the installed capacity that will be deployed annually. So again, this is the estimated amount of solar capacity that will be installed each year. So again, just for the sake of impact, I just want to show you, let's just say we're looking at, 7,500 kilowatts installed a year, which would be 7.5 megawatts, which is a big estimate, but let's just see in terms of impact. So again, the energy impacts deal with the generation potential of the entire community, and that is always based on the Air Resources District estimation of the amount of sunlight that hits your community in a given year. So if we want to click on that, it'll give a little explanation about that. But if we go to the reference sheet, This actually takes you to our SEEC old CAPA reference table for solar generation potential. And based upon the air district you're in, so we could just say the Bay Area, because that's where I'm located, we see I have a generation capacity of 1,643 kilowatt hours per year. Again, that's just for the entire, that's an estimation of the entire year. It's not site specific, so we're not talking about each individual home, whether or not it has a better generation capacity. So we want to take that figure of 1643, enter it here, and then here's where we get into the financial impacts. But again, this is just from a local government's perspective of specify the likely program admin costs and potential rebates that could be captured through this measure, which would be program costs. So that was a percent time of a full-time employee, so say 15%. We'll just say their salary is $55,000. So then we've entered all the inputs here, and we scroll down, and here are our outputs. So we have annual electricity production. That's the amount of kilowatt hours every year these 7,500 kilowatts of solar panels are producing. Next, it shows you the reduction in grid electricity. So basically it means that because we're having on-site generation, we're now taking out 42,044 MMBTUs from the grid. The amount of savings for the residential sector is accumulative based on the kilowatt hour price, is about 1.6 million. And then the annual program cost, which is what it's costing the local government to kind of administer this, is about $8,200 a year, because it's taking 15% of this full-time employee's staff time. And then we finally have the electricity savings discount rate, which is the nominal discount rate minus minus the electricity inflation rate, and then same thing with the program costs. So again, we can save this, and now we have our, let's see where it went. Okay, I believe it's this residential PV deployment. Again, I should have marked it. Again, that's another thing to remember. It's always good to have, always mark these reduction strategies in concert with the way it's labeled in your climate action plan. So now, how does this all work with the planning scenario? So let's actually go and create a new planning scenario. So we can call this the CivicSpark test planning scenario. We could go off the forecast of the SEEC field training forecast, because that's the one, and we can now create this planning scenario. As you can see, so this is really rubber hits the road, and this is where it gets a lot of fun, and we can get really interactive with this. As we can see, we have all of the sectors that were in our forecast and our inventories have now been ported into the planning scenario in one interactive chart. As you can see, we have our emissions target line for emissions target 1, emissions target 2, and emissions target 3, again, all based on the baseline. So we know we're trying to get to 51,629 metric tons by 2020, trying to get to 32,268 by 2035, and then down to 12,971. So as you can see, based on the business as usual trajectory of certain growths, that this local government has a lot of work cut out for them in terms of getting to their reduction target by 2050. So there's a pretty steep increase. The original forecast starting the baseline is 64,536 in 2005, and it's estimating this local government, the community at large, will be emitting close to 240,000 metric tons of CO2e if nothing is done, and that's even with RPS moving till 2020, and also also Pavley 2 in terms of the transportation standards. So again, we can actually toggle in and out of this. So if you just want to look at the built environment, it doesn't automatically repopulate, so it does kind of throw things off a little bit. But again, just for folks to know that the interactivity of the planning scenario. Again, you can export PNGs and everything right here, and then we'll get to in a minute these exports. These are all based on the information that you enter. So now we have our planning scenario set up. It's time to add new reduction measures. So as you can see right here, we have this drop-down menu that, again, for folks that are just starting, they will not have any reduction measures, so the only way to add those reduction measures is you'll have to create them in the add reduction measure box, add reduction measure window. So again, let's go and look at that residential PV deployment that we had just created. So it's this one, and we want to add. So now comes to the big part about implementation over time and cumulative effect. So again, we have the residential PV deployment. You can go ahead and edit the actions that are within this particular measure, or you could remove it. And here's what we're looking at, the start and the end year. So this really talks about the program implementation of when is it starting and when is it ending. So let's just say, for the sake of this particular local government, they decided back in 2010 that they were going to implement this really robust solar photovoltaic program, and they're going to do it every year for the next 20 years. Again, that's a very aggressive program, but again, I just want to show you what this looks like over time. So now here we want to activate this, and all the next step is to press save and see if this measure has enough packs enough punch to actually move the residential energy down. Actually, it did. That's pretty good. Ooh, that actually is quite robust. Let me just see 1 second. Wow, it went negative. Okay, great. Well, let's dial it back a little bit. Let's just say it goes from 2010 to 2020. Okay, so what you're seeing right now is a very interesting chart, because as you can see, the amount of activity that's going on, because they've really dialed up a huge amount of solar, it's going to drop down and then actually basically go negative for a while. But then, because when we basically launched these particular panels in 2010, the panel life comes back at about 2015, and then things start jumping up again. So for folks that are probably wondering what's going on, let's take a look at the reduction measure export right here. So again, this is just a quick snapshot of the reduction measure. So it's starting in 2010, ending. These are all the particular figures that we saw in the actual measure itself. So now we can take a look at scenario details, which is actually going to look at the way in which the scenario planner is operating with this particular measure. So as you can see, and starting in 2010, the local government was implementing the 7,500 kilowatt hours, and was actually reducing the grid by 2,632 in terms of CO2e. But as you can see, in 2011, there was a little less impact because the grid was getting cleaner. And it kept getting cleaner and cleaner until it hit in 2020, which is the year that the actual the measure stopped, went into place. And so what's happening right now is, in 2010, these same panels are now, what we're estimating, will go offline, and they won't be producing as much. Again, this is another scenario that there's a lot of debate about efficiency of solar panels. But the 7,500 kilowatts that were deployed in 2010 will now need to be replaced in 2030, because we're not sure what's going to be happening. So our assumption is that the grid will be producing, we will have to put back the same amount of, we'll have to basically replace the same amount of solar with the same amount of grid electricity that was being consumed at 2020. And it does that for the same thing for the next 10 years. So, 2030 all the way to 2040. And the residential electricity costs show you that basically the folks keep saving money. They keep saving money until it plateaus, and then it ultimately dies back down. But where it actually, when the program actually ceased to exist in 2040. And these are the program costs at the local government level. So any questions about the interaction of this particular measure? It actually was pretty interesting how it totally went. I haven't seen this one do this before. But in any event, oh, give me 1 second. Yeah, interesting. So yeah, any questions about this? And so basically we can go ahead and recreate any of the measures that are in the Climate Action Plan. And as you can see, things can really start moving in the right direction if you have a robust enough program. And then finally, the other export you can produce is the scenario basics, which allows you to just take a look at the CO2e over time based on each category. So there's actually probably an interesting place where you could recreate some nice looking charts in terms of what's happening with the residential energy. So as you can see, if you remember, because of that huge swing in the fact that RPS is coming online, as well as the the new PV program, that we can see a huge spike in emissions starting in 2010, 11, and 12, but then it peaks back up a little bit because of household growth rate. So again, you can create measures across any of the sectors that you have based on the Climate Action Plan that has been set up for the local government. So I'm going to click on monitoring now. We've got about 10 minutes or so to discuss this. It's very, very straightforward. So if folks don't have any questions about the planning module, we can hop right into the monitoring module. Again, it all starts on each one of the sectors. So we're looking at monitoring individual mitigation measures within the sectors that we've designated. So to take a look at residential energy, the way in which the monitoring module works is you set up with your name of the particular the measure that you have in place, and you want to monitor residential solar PV deployment. The year is where we start, whether or not you actually want to go back in time or start on the start date. And then here's the reduction strategy. So basically, since it's with residential energy, you can actually look. It will only provide the ones that are applied with the residential energy sector, so you don't need to scroll through too many. So again, what will happen is we're taking this reduction strategy. We want to remember that we wanted to put in 7,500 solar capacity, and then here's really how the tool works. Is it becomes an implementation status tool, where this is whether it's in progress, who's the point person, next steps in terms of next steps of just the project itself, implementation notes that can be ongoing. Here, financing provides you with capital cost, operation and management costs, cost savings, the financing type, how it was financed, the financing source, and then the impacts achieved, which is what's it affecting. So in this particular case, solar would be actually replacing, it could be electricity, and then the savings evaluation approach right here. Again, all help text at every step of the way, and then any impact study notes moving forward. So we can click there. Again, electricity saved. This would be an opportunity to show the impact saved, represent the annual reduction in energy use of the calendar year specified above. So again, this would be a 2000, let's say this would be, we started our measure in 2010, this would be for 2011. And what you would do this as is the kilowatt hours saved this is basically you'd have to go out and figure out what kilowatt hours were saved based on the amount of solar that was deployed. So whether you deployed all 7,500 or not. So let's just say it produced, let's say 150,000 kilowatt hours, okay? So then here, basically what we have is the evaluation details, which use the inputs in the section to provide as much information as possible. And then our outputs down here. So because we only identify this as electricity savings, we're only seeing a reduction in MMBTUs because we only produced 150,000 kilowatt hours. If we added another 0, it pushes up even more. If we add another 0, but I don't know, 1.5 million kilowatt hours seems a little heavy, but again, we can save that. And now we have our new monitoring records. So what I want folks to remember in this thing is a record has to be created for each year you're tracking the progress of your individual mitigation measures. So it's not something that we could set up and track. You create a measure and you track year over year. So when you go into creating these monitoring records, you have to track year over year progress of each one of these measures. So it'll be up to the local government to really track the progress of the actual measures that are going online, that are in progress, and then use the monitoring module as that kind of project management platform to allow them to track the progress over time to see if whether or not you're meeting your goals. And so the way in which we can look at the reports is, again, there's a huge amount of reports in terms of monitoring, implementation progress, the comparison of implementation of monitoring records that are linked to reduction measures. Same thing with the implementation efficacy. We also have implementation details, implementation status, projected to actual details, projected to actual summary, and then any indicator reports as well. So again, I think we've given you a good comprehensive overview. When we do the hands-on training next week, we'll be able to dive a lot more deeper into the monitoring module. But yeah, we've hit our time in terms of providing an overview of SEEC ClearPath, and also the 4 modules within SEEC ClearPath California. Do folks have any questions or anything that's going on that seems unfamiliar, or any questions that came up within any of the particular modules that we reviewed thus far? So if folks have a question, I could probably unmute you if you could type it in the chat box, and then we could make this a little more interactive as opposed to a one-way street. Okay. No questions here? Okay. All right, great. Thanks, Larry and Julie. Any of the members or other regional supervisors with questions? Okay. Well, if any pop up, we still have a couple more minutes. I just want to go over some final details from the presentation today. So in terms of supplemental resources for today's workshop, we do have a question. Let's see. Okay. Okay, perfect. Thanks, John. So in terms of supplemental resources, I will, again, first and foremost, I'll send I'd send just a reminder that for any of the regional supervisors that want to set up their account with SEEC ClearPath, I'll send instructions as well. But I want to share a couple different documents or resources to local government, to the members and also regional supervisors, which include a cheat sheet factor set cheat sheet for SEEC ClearPath, just some instructions on MFAC, the CO2 emission factor generator, and then also just some basic ideas about CACP, the old desktop application for data migration, just for folks to have handy in case they have any questions. And then in terms of next steps, as folks recall, we have webinar number 3, which will be Wednesday, November 12th from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. And that'll be a hands-on training for the inventory and forecasting modules. Again, that will be a very hands-on experience where at the beginning, or I will email all the regional supervisors the sample data, the sample information, and that we'll have very specific instructions on the number of sectors we're going to attack, and also the number of inventory records we're going to create. Same thing for the forecasting module. And so what we'll do is we'll give folks about 45 minutes to enter their inventory records, and then we'll take about 5 minutes or so to review each region's work. They're going to collaboratively work together. If there are some folks that have to work remotely, then we'll have to figure out a way to get them involved as well. But since we have a lot of groups, even with 5 to 6 groups, I want to take adequate time just to review the work. And since we have 2 modules that we're attacking on each day, we really want to give ample time to enter the records, create the records, and then ample time to review them. And then we'll follow the same workflow for webinar 4, which is a hands-on training for the planning and monitoring modules. I will send out invitations to LGC, Jenny, SCIF, and the rest of the regional supervisors. It'll be a go-to webinar, meeting, which will be a lot more interactive. And folks, I will be able to toggle in and off your screen, so hopefully folks will be able to use their laptops so that I can actually make you the presenter and then actually look at the screens and you can scroll through the work you did. So in terms of steps, first and foremost, the regional supervisor will register for SEEC ClearPath. Again, I'll send instructions about how to do that. Again, step 2, register for California SEEC website to access the resources and e-learning modules. And then again, we really hope that folks download and review all 4 module instruction guides from SEEC ClearPath web platform to get familiar with them outside of this training. And then please review the LGOP and U.S. Community Protocol as needed, just to get more familiar with the information you want and the kind of workflow, and also the way in which the emissions are calculated. So again, any questions or support, you can email me or give me a call. I will again provide the slide deck in a PDF form to everybody and send to Jenny, and then also send her over the recorded training, which should be processed in about an hour or so. And I will also send all of the supplemental resources available, and then instructions on setting up the local government, or at least the regional agencies or regional supervisors account within SEEC ClearPath. All right. Well, on that note, we'll wait a couple more minutes to see if there are any questions that came in about next steps. But it seems like everyone hopefully got a good comprehensive review of SEEC ClearPath. Yeah. Again, hopefully folks were able to see the seamlessness and the integration of this platform, and really how it can be an all-encompassing, comprehensive online emissions management platform for local governments to, again, to inventory, to forecast, to plan, and to monitor their municipal and community-scale greenhouse gas emissions. We're just really excited to be a part of SEEC and deliver this platform at no cost to the local governments in the state of California. And we're really seeing a pretty rapid adoption of this platform, and we hopefully see this as the online clearinghouse for the entire state of California from a local government perspective. Again, that's a very visionary perspective, but again, it's always good to be looking down from 30,000 feet to ensure folks can see the big picture at every step of the way. So, you know, data collecting and a lot of the emissions inventorying this can kind of get in the weeds at sometimes, but I always like to hopefully remind folks that they are part of a huge groundswell of local governments that are leveraging this type of platform to really make more informed decisions to hopefully make more resilient and successful and healthy communities. All right. Well, on that note, I'm going to stop the recording, and if there are any other questions, I can hang around for a few more minutes in case something pops up. But on that note, thanks again for everyone's attendance, and we look forward to collaborating with you next week for the hands-on training next Wednesday and Thursday from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. And I will make sure to get out all the particulars this afternoon. And again, any questions, feel free to let me know. And yeah, we're going to stop the recording now, and again, I can hang on for a couple more minutes to answer any questions. Thanks again, everyone.